You know, I actually had a phone conversation a while back, and I asked you what you felt you had learned most from the Bayosphere project, and you said that citizen journalism requires more direction and leadership. Does that ring any bells? And what have your thoughts kind of expanded on that subject since then?
Well, actually, my thoughts have basically moved to other things since then, but it depends what kind of citizen journalism one is talking about. If it's kind of an organized community effort, then you need, at some level, community organizer, and that just takes certain kinds of people and skills that are not standard in like blogging or other areas like that. So but it depends what you're trying to do, and there will be lots of experiments out there, and we're starting to see some things that work and some things that don't work so well, and I'm enthusiastic about the experimentation.
Say it depends on what you want to do. What do you think is the most interesting thing that we could try to do with these new tools and with citizen journalism?
No single thing. That's the whole point of it. There's infinite, not quite infinite, but there is such diverse potential. What I'm interested in seeing is what people do and helping those who want to do journalism, but watching and learning from the great experimentation that's going on out there. And with these tools in the hands of vastly more people than they used to be, now we can look for innovation that may come from anywhere.
Why did you leave the San Jose Mercury News, or what was going through your mind the day you left that paper?
I had an opportunity to try some new things and to be in the early days of a transition that I had talked about in a book, and was convinced that if I didn't play in this arena in a serious way, that I'd be missing an opportunity to help see that it went in a good direction. And I hope I'm helping in some ways, but it's great to see lots of other people getting into it.
Jay described it as leaving the old media for the new. Would you put it that way?
Not really. I've never left the media. I left traditional media company for work that involves some of the newer tools, but the traditional media are now using these tools, not perhaps as well as I'd like them to, but they're starting to get serious about engaging with their audiences in a conversation as opposed to a lecture, and that's good. And meanwhile, lots of people out on the edges are doing their own work and learning all kinds of good things. So I hope that new and old media, that differential is meaningless over time. It's just media.
Reverend Yearwood, one of our earlier interview subjects, made a point about how, in his view, media needs to run parallel to movements, was how he put it. And the example he gave was the civil rights movement, where if you wanted to participate in the civil rights movement, you turned on your radio to hear what was happening, and the two things were very closely intertwined. Do you think that citizen journalism sort of renews that possibility for media to run parallel to movements?
It's an interesting way to put it. I wouldn't have thought of it that way, but I think we've seen media developments used by people with goals to achieve those goals, and the left is actually in some ways much less good at it than the right. The right saw the potential for talk radio in ways that the left completely missed, and used it quite effectively. So that's a precursor of some of the citizen stuff going on now in some senses. People use the tools that are at hand to get their messages to people they want to get their messages to, But what's important now is that people have multi-directional communications. It's not controlled from the center, or shouldn't be, and that gives the people who had been the targets or the audience of that, the targets of people trying to get things done, now they're being forced to include those people in a much deeper way than they ever did in the past. So I like what's going on, and it's possible that people who are using these tools may be surprised by them, and that would be a good thing.
In your book, you write about how this moment when, as a journalist, you kind of realize that inevitably there's going to be someone in your audience that knows more about the topic than you do, and seeing that as an opportunity rather than as a threat. Do you think that that's something that is becoming more widespread in the media?
Well, it's just true by definition that the audience of any journalist collectively knows more about anything the journalist writes about than a single person, however qualified or talented that person is. It's just true by definition. So that, I can't see why that's a threat to people. It's a little daunting at first when you start hearing from all these people who know a lot more collectively than you do. And it takes an understanding that this is not lecture anymore, but conversation, and then it becomes kind of a wonderful opportunity to do better journalism. So I don't imagine that in the end that too many traditional journalists are going to be in any doubt about this. People are resistant not so much to the concept as to the application of it in some cases, because my impression of people at larger newspapers and TV in particular is they're in TV we'll call them readers, even though they're listeners or viewers, but call them readers in broad sense. In traditional media, we love the readers plural, or the listeners plural, or the viewers plural. We're really, really suspicious of the reader singular, or the viewer singular, because that single person can actually, in some respects, be an annoying part of the job, not a wonderful part of the job. Yet part of communicating with people, part of having a conversation, is that you're going to have a certain number of those interactions that aren't a lot of fun. But the value of having those in aggregate is so vastly higher than not having them that I just think this will be, I mean, it's not that there's any doubt about the truth of the fact that the readers know more than any given journalist. The question is to what extent and at what pace the journalists will adapt to that in a way that actually brings those people into the conversation.
My last question for you. What do you think, given that we're at a conference about media reform, what do you think we need to sort of push for politically in 2007 to help foster the growth of the kind of innovation that you're talking about, or at least not screw it up?
I think the network neutrality issue is clearly a very important one. While I'm personally not ready to see some of the legislation that's been proposed, because I think there is a possibility of doing more harm than good. I guess what I would like to see in general is fierce attention paid to that, and make sure that phony good news from the AT&T deal, which has been everyone's celebrating, not everyone, but a lot of people are celebrating as if they won something from AT&T, and I think in fact AT&T just beat the hell out of the net neutrality movement with that agreement. One thing politically I'd like to see, and I'm kind of sorry it's not the case at this event, is more diversity in the media reform community. For example, Phyllis Schlafly and her group were on the side of people who believe in net neutrality, and yet they're not here. This whole thing strikes me as much as I tend to agree with a lot of the positions that are taken here personally, not all, but many, I'm sorry that people on the right aren't here too. I think that's, as interesting as these conversations are here, I think they'd be much more interesting if we had people we didn't agree with on lots of issues here to talk about the things we do agree with. And that would be good for everybody to understand that alliances in the world we're in are not as clear as they used to be in some ways, and that we really need to make friends who we may disagree with on everything else. So I think that the biggest political goal that I have is to find the nonpartisan issues, or at least the ones where people who may not be on my side on many things, where I do agree with them, to work with them any way I can to get the things that we agree on done. And that's, in the end, I'm sure that will mean that things that I wish weren't happening will happen at some level. But I also think that we get more done if we work with people who we otherwise would run from the room if they showed up. So that's my only wish for this, is that it had been a little more diverse in the political sense, because it's wonderfully diverse in every other sense.